Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Understanding and Preventing Social Engineering Attacks, sponsored by SlashNext and broadcast by UBM. I'm Sarah Peters, Senior Editor with Dark Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. And lastly, if you are experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now on to the presentation, Understanding and Preventing Social Engineering Attacks. Discussing today's topic are Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer Inc., and Jan Lebond, Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at SlashNext. Chris established the world's first social engineering framework at socialengineer.org. He created the first hands-on social engineering training course and certification, Advanced Practical Social Engineering, attended by law enforcement, military, and private sector professionals. He is also the best-selling author of 4 books, including Social Engineering, the Art of Human Hacking, and Unmasking the Social Engineer, the Human Element of Security. And Jan Lebond, who is determined to have a very short bio, would like me to tell you that he is a longtime Silicon Valley veteran focused on networking, security, and cloud technologies. I'm delighted to have both of these gentlemen with me today. And today we're going to kick it off just with a quick question for both of you. Gentlemen, when you talk to cybersecurity professionals, on a scale of 1 to 10, how prepared or confident do they generally sound when you ask them if they feel like they can defend against social engineering attacks? Do they feel like, yeah, we got this covered? Or do they think that this is a complete black box source of complete terror and confusion? Chris, I'm going to give that one to you first.
Well, I think they start off feeling like they have a good handle on it when I talk to folks. But then many of them can't even identify some of the attacks that are out there, like what is smishing or how does vishing sound. So we end up first maybe getting some fear, because they realize that there's some attacks they don't realize. And there was a survey done in the UK that I think it was over 71% of security professionals interviewed and surveyed said that they have fallen for a phishing attack in the last 12 months. So I think that's kind of telling and where we're at in this industry right now.
Yeah.
So you kind of set them up and then let them down. Jan, how about you?
Yeah. In our travels and working with a lot of companies of different sizes, I think you said scale of 1 to 10. 10, I guess, being perfect protection and so forth. No one believes they're at a 10, because at the end of the day, when it comes to social engineering and phishing and pretexting and all that, there's a human element to that, and human beings are fallible, and they are multitasking, and they're distracted, and they don't remember their training. And then technical security controls, certainly help, and we're going to be covering some of that in the course of today's webcast. But I think most people think it's a 6 or a 7, and they know there's gaps, and they're just not always sure where those gaps are. So people are certainly doing a lot of things, but I haven't spoken to anyone who would say we're a solid 9. So.
And even if they were, maybe they think they're at a 9 and they're actually closer to a 3. So the goal of today is to get, exactly. Then they're at a negative 15.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the good news is everybody who's listening to us today the goal is, no matter what their confidence level is, hopefully by the end of this show, they will have a better idea of the threats and a better idea of what they can do about them. So to that end, I'm going to pass it on over to Chris to get us started. Chris, take it away.
Thank you. And nice to be here again with you, Sarah. So we're going to talk a little about understanding and preventing social engineering attacks. I like to always start this off with, well, you already did the who am I, so I'm going to skip this. So I like to start it off with a definition of how I define social engineering as any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. So if anyone here in the audience has heard me talk before, they know that I use this very broad definition to SE because I don't like to just apply it to the malicious uses. I think that many times for us to truly understand how social engineering works, we need to analyze it from the good side. We need to look at how we are influenced to make decisions each and every day from our spouses, our bosses, our people that work from us, our clergy, our therapists, our friends, our family. And when we analyze how we are influenced to make those decisions from a good side, it helps us to understand what psychological, physiological, and emotional content really creates the environment for us to make a yes decision or a no decision. And then when we apply that to a malicious attack, it helps us to see how the bad guys are getting us to do the very same thing, whether that's in any form of a social engineering attack. So I think this definition helps us to kind of get a clear picture of, as we move on in this, that we will talk mainly about the malicious side of social engineering here today, but to get a clear picture of how we can try to understand influence principles and how they're used against us each and every day. So when we do talk about SE from a negative standpoint, there's 4 main vectors really that we'll focus on. First being phishing, which we're probably all very familiar with, but those are the email-based attacks that we see in either mass form or in spear form, which would be very personalized to the target. Next is smishing, which is SMS phishing. So these would be text message-based phishing attacks that come into our mobile devices. Then vishing, which is voice phishing. Funny enough, if you haven't heard, this word has entered the Oxford Dictionary in 2015. So it's actually a real word now and not just made up and used by us in the industry. That stands for a voice phishing, and it would be the phone scams or phone-based phishing attacks that come into either our personal phones or corporate lines. And then finally, impersonation, which is the in-person attacks where someone is either coming on site, trying to gain access to your location, your home, steal something from your company, impersonate law enforcement, so on and so forth. So we might look at those 4 things and say, why? Why are these vectors so popular today? Why are they being used? And mainly it's because it's easy. You know, as humans, we're very fallible, and we oftentimes look back maybe a decade. I know when I started off in this industry, software was much easier to compromise. We were able to break into software using small bits of code. We can find O-days. We can find easy ways in through PDFs. I remember the days when Windows icons were fallible and we can compromise a whole network through an icon. Those days are over. Software vendors have gotten much better at securing their software. Hardware vendors have gotten much better at securing their hardware. And we have gotten much better at producing security technology that secures the perimeter. What we haven't done is come up with a method that helps secure the human. Because we are human and we want to trust, we want to believe that everyone's as good as we are. So we oftentimes see headlines like this. These 3 headlines are just a small sampling of huge sums of money that were lost to something as simple as a wire transfer. Not someone literally breaking in and stealing the money. It was a phone call, a phishing email, or a series of text messages, or a combination of those 3 things. And each one of these companies were convinced to wire transfer this amount of money out of their accounts to the attackers. So we can see the payloads are huge and the risk is small. And if they win, they get a very large payday. So this is why it's used. So let's go through each of them. Let's talk about some facts for phishing. As of 2018, this first one, a little shocking, 200,000 new malwares are reported each and every day. That's a little bit shocking to me when I read this kind of statistic, to think about, this is why we need antivirus. When people, I ask this often when I'm doing in-person speeches, if you think antivirus is a management or a security tool. And I'll get mixed bag. I'll give you a second to think about that. Is it a management or security tool? And I usually get about 50-50 for each. Well, personally, I feel it's a management tool, not a security tool, because antivirus can only catch known viruses, right? They can only catch known that have been identified and signatured. They can't catch ODays, but we still need it. And this is the reason why. Because there's 200,000 new types of attacks coming out per day that we need to be protected against. We won't go through each of these, but just look at some of those that really should scare us. That fourth one down, 91% of all corporate phishing attacks contain name spoofing. Now, why should that scare us? It scares me because what this means is that when you look at corporate phishing from 5 years ago, we still saw broken English, bad sentence structure, horrible grammar. And now you jump forward 5 years, and what you're seeing is 91% are containing name spoofing, which means that the attackers did research on you. The attackers looked into you. They saw who you are. They looked at you as a person, you as a company, and they know enough to spoof names of your, not only you, but the people that you would normally be communicating with. This means the attackers are really looking in and targeting on their targets. That's pretty scary if we think about it. So that statistic alone, all the others, of course, are scary, but that one alone really gets me thinking. And the one above it's also a little scary. 76% of organizations phished in 2017. We're seeing, the amount of breaches in the last year. It's kind of mind blowing to the point where I think many people just start shutting down. They stop thinking about it because it's too much to think about, and we just can't constantly see a new story almost every day coming out about another breach. And a lot of them involve phishing, and the large majority of them involve phishing attacks. Some other statistics about this: $109 billion are lost due to hacking just in the U.S. Alone every year, and 500 million of that 109 billion is just phishing. So when we look at numbers like that, really should open up our eyes to this is why. This answers again the question, why are attackers using this? Because the payout is huge. This is a large sum of money that they have going into their pockets, and that we are losing each and every year because of these vectors. Let's look at smishing. So these are actually two smish that we had, I had received, and we took screenshots of them. Very interesting, these two over the years. Smishing has a couple different goals in mind. First, of course, they want the click or the callback. Clicking could be so that you can install an app on your phone, which will give them remote control of your phone or enabling them to access data that's on your phone. A callback could be so they can get other intel from you, gather more information from you, or get passwords or bank account information from you. Right now there's some applications out there, mainly for Android, not for iDevices, that if installed can give full remote control of that device to an attacker. And last year there was even one that can turn your Android device into a remote access point. So if you had been compromised, you could your phone could become a remote access point for the attacker when you're on the corporate network, right? And now with BYOD, it's a huge deal. And we see these smishing attacks come in after we see large breaches. So a bank gets breached. That's big news. It's in the headlines. And now we'll see an increase in smishing attacks. That bottom one there from Wells Fargo, we see this occurring after the Wells Fargo breach, where it had a very realistic link. They were using a shortened link here, but when you clicked it, it looked like a realistic link. And when you opened it up, it looked like the Wells Fargo login. So you were asked to log into the application to secure your account. In another version of this, there was a phone number, and when you called the number, it sounded like a call center. So the one that I got, you called the number and they actually answered as Wells Fargo, and you hear all this noise in the background and it sounds like a call center saying that your account was part of the breach. They wanted to help secure it. Can we get some information from you to secure your account? And because you believe that it's Wells Fargo, you end up actually giving them information that helps them compromise your account. So it's very, very scary stuff. And there's a brand new vishing attack, or I'm sorry, smishing attack that has a double layer to it. And this is it. This is kind of just came out new now. So people are getting text messages that look like this. Please call me. It's an emergency. I need your help. So you get a text message with a phone number. If you call it back, there's just a person on the other end screaming and screaming. It sounds like someone's being mugged or hurt, cursing and screaming at you, and they're recording the call while you're asking, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Right now, they have not yet identified the reason for this type of smish/vishing attack. If you don't call the number back, they then call your phone and leave a voicemail on your phone of someone screaming and cursing at you. Again, besides the fear that they're trying to induce, they haven't yet figured out if there's a further purpose for this. But it's brand new, just started popping up in the last week or so. So we're seeing this more and more increase. And I'm sure, as time goes on, we'll see if there was some recording of voices, if they were using this for some other purpose to that effect, or if it was just trying to induce fear, which gets people to take an action that they shouldn't take. But we see each and every week that goes on, month that goes on, we tend to see an increase in the different types of attacks that are used and for different purposes, anything from just fear-based to actual financial to as anonymous. Some of the hacktivist groups do it just for the heck of it, right? So we see everything in between. Let's take a look at some vishing statistics. Now, personally, for me, what and this is, I can call myself a false prophet here, but what I kind of foresee coming in the future is that vishing will become the biggest vector. With how easy it is to set up a VoIP server, voice over IP, and how easy it is to set up internet telephony tools, I see massive amounts of vishing attacks coming from all over the globe into American companies and homes and on Western cultures. We see a lot of these type of attacks coming from third world countries on the Western countries. They view us as being very, very wealthy. Maybe in comparison, that's not a false fact, and they use that to attack, trying to get financial information, credit cards, bank account data, using things like the Microsoft scam, the IRS scam, and the cost of setup is very small, and the payouts could be huge. Considering that, in the IRS scam, the average ask is somewhere between 2 to 5K US. If you get even a 5% success ratio at that, you may be closing a few of those an hour. That's a huge amount of money in some of these countries for a small group of people getting together to do these calls. So looking at some vishing statistics, in 2017 we saw over 9.5 billion lost in just by Americans alone in vishing attacks. This is a 56% increase from just 2 years prior. So really, we can look at something like that, and that should really astonish us to see that what's it going to be? What's the increase going to be when we get the 18 statistics and the 19 statistics? Well, in 2019, they're estimating that over 50% of all mobile calls will be vishing. And you're probably sitting there thinking, yep, that's about my phone right now. And I agree with you, right? That's where I'm at. I'm at the point right now with my cell phone that I just stopped answering it. If you call, you're probably going to voicemail if I don't know your number or your name. And if it's important, you'll leave a message. Because I would say out of every 10 calls, maybe 2 of them are somebody I know, and the rest are, get a loan, some kind of other sale, some, Canadian drug, something like that. It's ridiculous, the amount of scam calls I get on the phone. And I've been called 2 or 3 times by the, air quotes, IRS, because I haven't paid my taxes, and they want to come and arrest me just in the last 3 months. So I imagine if I'm getting those calls, all of you are most likely getting similar calls and being under attack by these very same things, as we see this statistics being very realistic in our real life here. Impersonation is probably our lowest form that we see because the risk is so high, right? Because it takes an actual person to go on site and to be in person there. And of course, that creates an environment where the risk of getting caught is super high. So we see this as the lowest used option for social engineering, but used much by nation states. And I got to tell you, one thing I've been noticing is we collect news articles on all of these vectors. One of the things I notice often throughout the last year is how many people are impersonating law enforcement in this country. It's quite staggering, usually to perpetrate violent crimes, but they are impersonating law enforcement in doing that. So we could see, in our case, as a social engineering company that performs penetration tests and red team tests, we oftentimes will use outfits like these, the janitor, pest control, other ones like that. And we find that those work quite well in being able to gain access to buildings unnoticed. So we find that in the real world we see these attacks occurring and similar types of impersonation attempts or impersonating an actual real person to gain access to the building. So we see very, very common. Now, when we hear all of these, sometimes it's easy to sit back and go, only a stupid human would fall for this stuff. And I want to just kind of quell that. And I want to do that by actually telling you a very embarrassing personal story, which, much to Sarah's dismay, will not involve pineapple pizza, because that is the worst thing any human can consume in their life. And if you like pineapple pizza, you have a problem. We can talk about that at a different venue. But for right now, let's talk about social engineering. So in my career, I've sent about 13 million phishing emails. I know, Sarah, I know, I'm sorry, but I had to bring it up just in case anybody was thinking about it. So 13 million phishing emails in my career, and all of them legal and legit, of course. That's what we get paid to do. And I wrote a book on phishing, my third book. It's called Phishing Dark Waters. It's all about the psychology of phishing, how to set up a corporate phishing program, and why phishing works. And I clicked on an actual fish. I got phished, right? So I'm the guy who wrote the framework on social engineering. I'm the guy who wrote a book on phishing. I'm the guy who fishes 13 million people in the last few years. And yet here I am, and I actually got phished. Well, what happened? I'm an Amazon junkie, and I'm one of these guys that literally shops on Amazon daily. If I'm in a store and I'm about to buy something, I open the Amazon app just to see if I can get it better and cheaper on the Amazon app. Well, I was prepping for DEF CON conference, a security conference, and I was ordering a whole bunch of stuff from Amazon for part of the conference, a little kids competition we throw out there. And I got an email a couple days before I left that said one of your recent Amazon orders will not be shipped due to a declined credit card. I was super busy. I was not sleeping because I was prepping for the con. And without thinking, I clicked on the link. It went to a very realistic Amazon login page, and as I went to go log in, I don't have my password saved, but usually my username is saved. So I went to go log in. I noticed that as I was typing my password in, my username wasn't there. So I looked up at the URL bar, and it was something.ru. The Russians got me, right? And I was like, I can't believe it. I didn't do anything I tell all my clients. To open up a browser, to go to Amazon.com, log in that way. I clicked the link and almost gave my credentials over. And I tell you this terribly embarrassing story, despite me supposed to being the granddaddy of social engineering, is because I don't think it's just stupid humans that fall for social engineering attacks. In that instance, it was the right trigger at the right time with the right emotional content. I'm an Amazon junkie that was not sleeping, preparing for a conference, and had just done an Amazon order. All of those things combined worked on me. Now, maybe you're not. Maybe it won't work on you, right? Like I got Colin and Raymond here on my side with pineapple pizza. But, Sarah, she likes pineapple pizza. So maybe if you sent her a pineapple pizza fish, she'd be clicking on it. right? But, these normal people like Colin and Raymond who don't like pineapple pizza would not fall for that fish. So that's not the right emotional trigger. So if you get the right emotional trigger, and this is what we've learned from this so far, 91% of corporate fish involve your name. Well, that means they're looking into you. So they're going to find what your emotional trigger is. So don't assume it's just stupid humans that fall for these things. Oh, no, we have someone who's on your side loving pineapple pizza. That's sad. That's sad. I'm sorry for you.
For the record, Chris, I prefer onions and peppers on my pizza or plain, but I do think pineapple would go okay with onions and peppers.
No, it's not Italian.
But I'm going to try. I agree.
Terrible.
I'm going to let you proceed with your presentation, and I'm going to pick this up with the people in the comment section. But thank you,
have one
and
fan.
proceed.
Okay. So, just really want to get that point as we talk about how do we mitigate social engineering. It's really, really important because I hear too many times in this industry people will use the phrase, there's no patch for human stupidity. And I don't think social engineering just works because of stupidity. Social engineering works because of being human, not because of being stupid. Because if you get the right trigger at the right time to the right person, they will fall for it. Okay, so with that in mind, how do we mitigate? Well, here's the 4 steps: education, testing, mitigation, and reporting. Okay, let's talk about those 4 things separately. So education. Okay, so there's 4 things. There's a few things that we need to talk about when it comes to education. First and foremost, I'm a big believer in education being something very, very real world. So with education, if it's this, 90-minute CBT you give them once a year, no one's going to remember that, right? I use this analogy often. If you want to learn how to fight, so you wanted to be a boxer, not professionally, you just wanted to learn how to box, and you went into a boxing gym, and the instructor put you down in front of a computer and showed you a 20-minute CBT on boxing, and then put you in the ring with a prize fighter, you'd be like, this guy's a nut job, and you'd leave the gym. This doesn't work. So you would want him to put you in gear, to put you in front of a heavy bag, to put you in front of a speed bag, and to show you how to take a punch, throw a punch, how to hold your body, how to stand, how to do all those things. Well, that's the type of education I'm talking about. Real world education. What does it feel like to be fished? How does fishing work? This robust security awareness training needs to go a little deeper than just, here's a funny cartoon video on what is fishing. It needs to be based in realism. What are the current attacks? I hear too many companies say, we can't use that. It's too real. You know what? Well, you're doing a disservice to your people. You need to use the real world attacks. You ever watch those funny videos on YouTube of people who have these unrealistic martial arts skills? So if you learn that, so it's never going to work for you in a fight. If you really wanted to learn self-protection, you learn a skill that works in an actual fight, not some weird fancy martial art that's just good for show, right? And then not just focusing on one vector, but look at the vectors that affect your company. Now, if you're a company that doesn't have external phone numbers, well, then maybe you don't need to have phishing training. But if you have phone numbers and email, well, then maybe you need multiple trainings of phishing and phishing, right? So you need to look at how your company, you need to look at your company and see what kind of vectors you need that you are liable to, and then how you will train your people. Testing then. So once you educate, now how do you test? So the testing part needs to be, again, realistic. So what does this mean? I'm a big proponent of you actually fish your people. Go back to the boxing analogy. If all you did was just show the person, if your instructor just had you hit a heavy bag the whole time, yeah, you'd get strong, you'd get fast, but you'd never really know if you knew how to box. So eventually, you got to get in the ring. Eventually, you get in the ring, and you get in the ring with a person who doesn't want to kill you, right? That person throws some punches at you, you learn how to block, you learn what it feels like to get hit. So, yeah, you get in that ring, and you have a sparring partner is what they call them. So that realistic attack vectors like actually fishing your people, actually vishing your people, not using just templates and a phishing SaaS, not using automated phishing tools. Those things aren't realistic. But if you do consistent, timely, current, real-world type of testing, then you will see how well that affects your people and keeping them prepared and educated. Then next is mitigation. So now you find the holes. So you can't just throw your hands up and be like, okay, we found some holes. Now what? No. You find the holes and you say, okay, what do we got to do? Well, we got to make it harder, right? Because you're never going to patch the human 100%. So here's some things you can do to make it more difficult, even if or when the human fails, right? Stronger password policies, enforcing the use of password managers, making sure you got second factor or multi-factor auth on everything that you can, making sure that your devices are secured, enforcing VPNs. These little things are not 100% fixes, but they will make you not the low-hanging fruit, right? You mix that with the education and the real-world testing, bam, you're great to go, right? You are great to go. So I think, if you, just those three, before we even get to the final one, with those three alone, when we've implemented those in companies, what we have seen is a marked improvement. Before we even get to reporting, I want to just give you like a sidebar on one company we worked with for 3 years on their phishing work, applying these three principles. We saw a 72% reduction in actual malware on their network from applying these three things in their company. And this was a company with over 200,000 employees. So this was a huge, huge deal by just applying these three things, being consistent and working on them with this. Okay, but now you apply this last piece, which is probably the biggest and most important, and this is reporting. And I think someone said this in the question area about creating a security awareness culture. So what is a security awareness culture? Well, that's when people feel safe and they feel empowered to report things that occur. So do you make reporting easy? Do they have to get on a phone and file this long phone call to report every little incident? People aren't going to do that. Is there a process to file a report for a phishing or a vishing attack, or have you made it easy for them to do? Does it involve the entire organization from the top down? I mean, does your testing, does your mitigating, does your education involve from the CEO down to the lowest person in the company? If it does, you're going to have a much larger success ratio than if you're just targeting a small group of the people. But if you can make it easy for people to report, you create that strong culture by enforcing the positive, not by reminding the negative, and you involve the entire organization while applying the education, testing, and mitigating, I guarantee you are going to see drastic improvements in how you mitigate and combat against social engineering attacks. So I think we'll have time for some Q&A at the end, but if you ever want to reach out to me, there's multiple ways you can reach out to me to talk about these topics. I'll try to answer some of your questions as we move forward. But what I'd like to do now is just hand this off to Jan. He's going to take over and continue on the same theme of how we can focus on certain types of social engineering attacks and mitigate and fight against them.
Hey, thanks, Chris. And it's actually Jan. So if you said Jan or Jan, I know you'd be a fisher, trying to fish me there. So
I was trying to fish you.
So appreciate it. So thanks for the great intro and take on things there, Chris. What I wanted to help the audience with here a little bit today is getting a little more of the technical aspects on some of the different phishing methods and technical controls, and run you through some examples and some screenshots as well, things we're spotting on the web and reported by some of the firms we're working with. There is real changes in the threat landscape and thus in the security controls and things people need to do to improve their security posture around it. You hit on earlier, a lot of these different things, including, vishing and smishing, don't even have them on the diagram here. The attack vectors, continue to increase. Email is by far still statistically the most popular phishing method, and spear phishing method. But as the ways that people communicate have expanded greatly, so has, you know, Fisher's toolbox. Right, they can reach you over social media, very popular with LinkedIn and InMails, people posing as recruiters or as vendors, offering it for a report or something like that. And it's very easy to do, you know, spear phishing through InMail, also through social media, things like that. They're also, the attack vectors include search results, you know, trying to encourage people to get to a site and, you know, load some malware that way. You know, freeware, ads, pop-ups in the browser. You know, basically the inbox is not the only, you know, place that phishing, you know, occurs. And there's also a lot of new phishing types emerging, and by that there's new categories of phishing, particularly on the web. And I'll jump here and show you a few examples. So most everyone is familiar with, you know, one of the most popular aims of phishing is credential stealing, right? Trying to steal someone's logins to one or more SaaS applications or an account or something. In some cases, yeah, it could be for consumer things such as Amazon or their Apple login, but a lot of times it's also for a business application or something like that. And since people do tend to reuse passwords, you know, people can use, threat actors can use brute force attacks to kind of, or if they use this password here, they might use similar ones, you know, elsewhere. So, you know, fake login pages, credential stealing, especially for the most popular types of places, Amazon, PayPal, Apple, things like that, there are good technical security controls for that, but there's a huge variety of these, and they look so convincing and so real. They're carbon copies of you know, exact replicas of the real thing, and they can even spoof the URL and use puny code and other things into there, so that it's hard to spot it from the URL and the domain alone. Another thing that you see here, besides just classic fake login, is the use of malicious browser extensions. And this is, you know, you get a plugin to your Chrome browser, Firefox, whatever, there, and it might do something useful. It might be an ad blocker, it might do something else. It just gets an online update after you get it, and then it becomes spyware. And essentially you have you know, a man in the browser type thing that's now, you know, be a keylogger or doing other forms of spyware. There. And this is really difficult. Is customers, you know, there's a lot of BYOD devices, you know, they have dual purpose laptops and phones they use for both business work as well as personal life. They're on the network, they're off the network. Again, unless you have, you know, real lockdown desktops on some of these machines, they get these browser extensions, and then that allows the threat actors a way in. So browser extensions are one of the most dangerous things we're seeing out there, particularly because they're essentially, you know, some of these are fileless. They're just JavaScript and HTML code. There's no binary or exe, you know, malware for your antivirus to detect. So these are presenting a big challenge. There's also, as Chris had mentioned earlier, a lot of these tech support scams, things like this. So a lot of times you can be traveling the web, you get a pop-up, you get a something. In this case here on the one on the left, says, hey, your machine's infected, call this number right away, and now because starts as digital and then becomes phishing later, then they then say, oh, well, we have to get a remote agent, you know, that you call them up, they put a remote agent on your system, which then plants malware on your system as they pretend to clean up a phony thing there. And gift and prize scams. We're going to, you know, give you a big deal on Bitcoin or something like that. Again, this might sound more consumer-oriented, but again, if they're using a business device or a personal device that has access to corporate assets, corporate data, again, they can steal credentials this way or do some other things. Say, oh, you down this, and now you just got to get your little, you know, Bitcoin miner, and away you go. So some of these different, like, kind of those some of the new phishing types that are emerging on the web. And so, yes, it's dangerous in your inbox with phishing, but as you're just traveling the web and you're getting pop-ups, you're getting ads, you're getting other alerts, it's pretty challenging. As you mentioned, it's really, really hard for employees to spot fakes, and that becomes even more true on mobile devices where you don't necessarily even see the full URL if you have a full-screen browser and so forth. And again, the threat actors are smart, right? They're getting more sophisticated, and so these attacks really evade detection. You know, classic anti-phishing technologies, you know, really do look at the URL and look at the domain, and is it a reputable domain? How long has it been registered? Who is it? You know, who's it registered with? And that sort of thing. So, you know, vast majority of phishing sites and malware sites are now using compromised, you know, otherwise legitimate websites to host the phishing pages. And so your things that block your URL filtration that would normally block a bad site has no reason to block this good site, which is hosting the phishing stuff. And so it's getting right through. Using well-known cloud services, like Azure and so forth, to host their pages, and then there's a huge variety of methods to obscure the URL and the domain name that appears to the user there. And so a lot of this, of course, there's email phishing, but think of it as HTML phishing. It's delivered directly into the browser, and that's bypassing a lot of the infrastructure that you guys have invested in heavily in terms of your email gateways and your antivirus and endpoint protections. And so the threat landscape is getting more dangerous. And oftentimes when we discuss this, with customers too, they go, okay, yeah, we've got good protections for some, but for some of this other stuff, maybe not so much. And so the other thing besides the vectors and how it's sneaking in, you have to look at the speed of phishing attacks. And if you look at this graphic here, it kind of shows you that, when a phishing attack is launched, you said, most often in email, but often in other ways with InMails or things, they get 90% of the clicks. You look at the red line there going up real fast. 90% of the clicks happen in the first 2 hours. The little timeline at the bottom there, those are 4-hour increments there. So what you're looking here is a 48-hour spread across the graph. And all the victims that they're going to hook with a phishing attack are hooked, 80% are hooked within that very first hour, and 90% are hooked within the 2 hours. And there's a few long tail clicks later on. But basically, when a phishing attack is launched, it's very quick in terms of its ability to harvest and trick the users. There's a lot of malware going live each day, and a lot of that's because it's polymorphic, malware. It's changing its thing, and that's why they said the signatures or based solutions are not as effective. But there's also many tens of thousands of new phishing sites going live each day. So it's challenging to block all that. And again, if a lot of them are going up on compromised domains and things like that, you have no reason to block them normally. And not only do they pop up real quick, they disappear really quick. They often, the average lifespan of these is about 4 to 8 hours now. The web page goes up and then goes down. So before it's even known or blacklisted, the attack's already come and gone. And this makes it really challenging for security professionals to go, well, how often are we even being phished? Well, they can base it on incident alerts they see from their systems or reports from their users, but how much is happening they don't even know about. It's the unknown unknowns. That's really challenging. And, given the speed of attacks, the variety of vectors and things like this for these social engineering attacks, you think of the threat feeds and the technologies that rely on URL reputation and the crawl-based things that are out there looking for bad infrastructure, they're just too slow to be effective. By the time most people get a blacklist or a threat feed on something, the attack's already come and gone. So, these, present some real challenges, for people. So, in some ways here, it's a tough one. You guys remember the old whack-a-mole game here at the amusement park, but just kind of security whack-a-mole thing. I mean, keeping up with, attacks as they pop up and go away, it's challenging. Imagine you got a thing like this, but it's probably got thousands if you're a large, enterprise. A lot of attacks, you have a lot of incidents, being reported, and you're not even sure which are the real ones that you need to pay attention to. So it can be very challenging, again, because the growing number of vectors and the speed of attacks and how they're sneaking in, not just in the inbox, but also into the browser. So, in this context here where, your employees have to go on the web to access SaaS business applications, to do work, to do research, to interact with vendors, things like that, how do you protect yourself? And to your question and earlier, Sarah, you kind of kicked off the webinar today. You asked, well, how do people rate themselves, on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of their protection against social engineering threats and security? It's say most of you will say it's a 6 or 7. They're hesitant to say they're a 9. No one could be a 10 because we're talking people. But it's how do you move it? How do you improve your security posture and protection against it? And I think Chris covered some really good stuff there with a real strong emphasis on people, right? Educating and training, your people to help spot phishing threats, because no matter how advanced your security controls, your technical controls get, some things will inevitably get through. These people may be off your network and outside your firewall perimeter. You may tell them to use VPN, they don't. Again, it's just hard to control people, and again, these attacks are so sophisticated, personalized, and it said if it hits the right trigger at the right time, they can be duped. So cyber awareness training, testing, everything Chris brought up is an absolute, and there's a lot of great ways of doing that. Vendors that specialize in that, and it's something you have to do. The key thing there is to mention, and he did, is that you have to be aware on many communication areas, not just the inbox. You have to look at text and smishing. You have to look at your browsers, your ads, everything you're getting up to go. Does this feel right? Does this seem right? And we have the ability to report on that. Given that phishing is still attack method with email addresses so freely available with all the breaches and people being able to guess when they want to do a targeted email spear phishing attack, you need to have that secure email gateway, a large number of vendors doing that, and those provide protection not just for phishing but also for spam and other controls and things like that. So that's a given there to have that to help protect against phishing. Your URL filtration, you have a number of systems in most large organizations in terms of your firewalls, web proxies, DNS, things like that, things that control what sites people can get to. And the key thing with these is that they've got to be kept up to date. If phishing attacks, appear and disappear within minutes to just a few hours, a once-a-day update to your blacklist or your threat feeds, or even once every 12 hours as you're leaving your organization incredibly exposed. So looking at faster ways of getting, real-time phishing threat intelligence or phishing feeds into your security controls is very, very popular. It's very, very, important. I don't have it on the slide there, but a key thing to mention also is obviously you need to have, antivirus, and particularly the next-gen antivirus, there, because even if, suppose a phishing attack comes through with either a weaponized document or some malware, or they visit a site which encourages them to get a bad plugin or malware of some sort, you do need endpoint protection, in your systems, and it's also helpful to have that antivirus on the network perimeter and, with the sandboxing and things like that. So again, not on the slide, but do want to mention is the AV and is very, very important. Again, your systems, whether it's your email gateways, your firewalls, proxies, and things, they're only as smart as they are in terms of the up-to-date intelligence that's fed into them. So, encourage you guys to, get a variety of threat feeds. There's ones available open source, also commercial vendors, and /Next ourselves who provide specialized real-time phishing threat feed. To help, bolster your defenses against these fast-moving attacks and so forth. A real tough one is real-time phishing detection. How do you detect when there's an actual attack or threat, on your own network? So email gateways are a big part of that in terms of email phishing. Again, they do a lot of natural language processing. They're examining emails. They're looking to see if they do include an attachment. They're examining the links. Do those links go to bad sites? But again, they're only as good as their detection and what they're told is a bad site versus a good site there. So again, if someone's doing a phishing attack, it's employed a compromised website, which no one would have any reason to block, it's not going to help. It's going to let it through. So, it really helps to also consider having some sort of systems in place to do real-time phishing detection to know when someone on your network browses to one of these sites. That's trying to encourage them to, fake login or scareware or get a browser plugin or some other kind of malware on their system there. And Chris had brought up earlier too that the two-factor authentication really key there. It's not a panacea. We deal with many customers and they go, well, I have 2FA here, so I'm protected with login problems. But as many of you who've been researching this, the 2FA is becoming easier and easier to defeat. Again, if you have a man in the browser type of corruption on your machine, your antivirus can't see it. It's just JavaScript, HTML. serving as a keylogger, spying on your system. It's just waiting there, waiting for the second factor to be entered there. So it comes in, and they're watching that, and off they go. Point you to a lot of good blogs and so forth to do that. So the key in terms of understanding and overall preventing, I should say, really is protecting your employees more than preventing. It's hard to prevent the attacks, but it's more to how do you, bolster protection. The key is to really just try to stay ahead of threats as much as possible, with good intelligence and the good security stack to provide, maximum protection, so that you can shield your users from phishing attacks as much as possible. There's no 100% perfect solution, but if you can cut down the number of attacks that actually reach users and they're actually well trained and not take the bait, they're going to be in much better shape. If you can add the real-time detection for, catching targeted spear phishing attacks, things that are hitting victim zero, we call them 0 hour versus 0 day, because with phishing attacks gone in a few hours, it's more like a 0 hour attack. You need to have something you can spot that there's bad traffic or someone's browsing their bad site, right then, and then kind of considers your employees as a human firewall. They're in some ways they're your last defense, but they are still a defense, and they play a role. So again, if people did all these things here to set up a good multi-layer defense strategy, and with the training and the real-time intelligence and so forth, you can get that your security posture from that 6 or 7, up to a strong 8 or a 9. Can never be a 10 because we're talking people. And that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah, and Chris, to see us through a couple of questions.
Thank you so much, Jan. Gentlemen, you've both thoroughly educated and slightly terrified me, so I'm delighted to now open it up to questions from the audience, who I'm sure feel similarly. Before we begin with today's Q&A, I'd like to remind the audience to direct your attention to our webinar survey, which is available on the right of the presentation window. If you close that, you can reopen the widget by clicking the icon along the bottom of your screen. Thanks in advance for doing that. As a reminder to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we're not able to answer all submitted questions during today's webinar, we will be sure to share them with our speakers, who can reply to you offline. Okay, we have a lot of questions in the chat that are along the same veins of each other. So I'm going to do a little bit of summing up. A lot of people's questions are related to awareness programs. And I'm wondering, so how frequently is frequently enough to educate your users on social engineering? How much is enough? How much is so much that it's just bothering everybody? And also, how often do you need to update the messaging so that it's keeping up with all of the different changes in methods? And because as Jan was going through, just how phishing domains change so quickly, for example, how do you make sure that you're giving them stuff that is still accurate? So Chris, we haven't heard from you in a while. I'm going to take that one to you first.
I think frequency is, there's many questions I would have if there was a client sitting in front of me asking me that question, like the size of the company, how many employees, the locations, things like that. But for a general rule, I say phishing is every employee every month, once a month. Vishing is monthly, but for the company. So you do a block of hours for the company for the month. You're not trying to hit every employee every month. And red teaming, physical security stuff is annual. You're doing it once a year at a location. And then smishing testing is only done if you're, that can be done irregularly as needed based on your BYOD policies within the company. And I would alter that really based on what the size of your company, how many employees you have, and what technology you use in and outside the company.
Got it. Jan, anything to add there?
Yeah, it's. I mean, Chris is definitely more of a specialist in this area, and he lives and breathes it and works with organizations every day. The the key thing is that, yeah, I mean, how often you do it, yeah, you don't want it to be annoying. They're going, oh, geez, this again, but you have to raise the importance, and I think you also have to, people have to be taught. I mean, there's a lot at stake. A breach isn't just like, something like this. This could jeopardize your job. This, the value, the shares, the value of your organization, the viability of your organization. If there's intellectual property theft, if there's a massive breach of some kind, I mean, this can do serious damage to a business. And you realize it's not just about fun and games and that sort of thing. And there's real things at stake. And so if that helps them take it a little more seriously and retain info, all the better.
Well, speaking of the idea of reputation to the business, kind of flipping it a little bit, one of the questions we've had is about what to do when your own organization is being used, is being impersonated in a phishing attack on somebody else. And I'm thinking about, for example, the Wells Fargo attack that Chris was mentioning earlier, or if, for example, maybe part of the domain was hijacked for phishing purposes or something. In that circumstance, what does an organization do to protect their own brand reputation? Jan, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real need for that, and especially for the more popular brands, say banks, PayPal, payment services, large, Amazon, Apple. There's actually a number of vendors out there that specialize in monitoring. It's kind of like a brand reputation monitor to see if there's any impersonations going out there, and so it's both a combination of they look for people who are doing typo squatting, slight mistakes on domain names, things like that, registering strange stuff, and then, trying to do, then so there's a number of vendors out there that are out there that exist to specifically meet that need. So if you're a larger organization whose brand may be jeopardized in phishing attacks, by someone trying to, copy your login page and everything, I thoroughly recommend you, check in with some of these vendors. There's a number of them out there.
Chris, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's the right path. I wouldn't add anything else to that.
All right, well, gentlemen, we are just about out of time here, so I'm going to give you each just a few seconds to give your final thoughts to the audience out there. If you had one singular piece of advice for them, what would it be? Chris, you're up first.
Don't eat pineapple pizza. That's the thing I want you to take away. I'm just kidding. No, really focus on the people in your organization. I think take seriously that as a company, our jobs is to empower and educate our populations on how to stay safe. The space out there is very unsafe and very insecure, and the attackers are constantly getting better. We need to take our job seriously as company owners to empower and educate our people to mitigate these very dark waters.
Good stuff. Jan?
Yeah.
You're up.
Yeah. I'd say, it was actually, I saw another question, coming in here, and someone says, is there a solution in the market so if you use it, you can prevent almost all these social engineering attacks? And I tried to touch on that in the last slide, but it's, there is no panacea. There is no silver bullet that will protect, your employees 100% of the time. So, the best practices are, you have to have layered security defenses, multiple type defenses for your email, URL filtration, your threat feeds, your threat intelligence, your endpoints, your antivirus, two-factor authentication, plus training. And even with all that, some attacks are still going to come through. And so then you have to look at, well, then how quickly, I think your time to detection, you said TTD, Chris brought it up, and then how quickly can you remediate it? Because if you can know that at least that it did occur, okay, something got through all these defenses, if I can know within a few, minutes or something, I can quickly know, hey, Nancy in finance just got fished. Let me check with her, find out what she did, check her machine, that sort of thing. So, the faster that you can detect it and remediate it, should it get through, is also really key, because, you don't want something actually coming in, compromising your machine and moving laterally through your network and ultimately leading to a breach of some kind. So I wish there were a perfect solution or a single solution, but there isn't. It takes a combination of technologies and employee training to at least improve protection.
All right. Good stuff, gentlemen. Both, thank you so much. That is all the time we have today. So thank you, Chris and Jan, and thank you, of course, to our sponsor, /Next, as well as to all of you in the audience. Within the next 24 hours, audience members, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been available today to listen to the event with us. This webinar is copyright 2019 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and /Next, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Once again, I'm Sarah Peters. On behalf of our guests, Chris and Jan, and everyone at Dark Reading, thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.